My name is Helen Bass, and you're listening to Sincere Practice. Today's topic, postpartum depression. You know, postpartum depression doesn't care what language you speak, but the shame around it, that part can be cultural. Today, I'm sitting down with two women I highly respect who know about postpartum firsthand, Peggy and Jasmine, the host of Healing the Tigress podcast. Peggy is a licensed clinical social worker and perinatal mental health therapist. Jasmine is a doctor of pharmacy. Both are certified in perinatal mental health, and both are Taiwanese American mothers who know what it's like to navigate through life postpartum. They started this podcast because the conversations they needed as new moms just weren't around about the darkness, the identity loss, the cultural pressures to just be grateful. Those conversations didn't exist in their community, so they built it for themselves. And 54 episodes in, Healing the Tigress is doing what so many Asian American mothers wish someone had done for them: saying the quiet part out loud. Today, Jasmine and Peggy are sharing what postpartum really looked like for them, why therapy still carries stigma in Asian households, and how inner work and breaking generational patterns changed everything. Let's get into it. I'm just really grateful for the service y'all are doing and the fact that y'all are creating Asian-specific postpartum education is just beautiful. So thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah.
Truly,
Yeah.
I feel like the stars aligned, we connected, and it's continuing to build on that relationship and continuing to further the resources.
Yeah. So why don't we start with what started Healing the Tigress? What were y'all's origin story in opening up this podcast?
Well, I have been a licensed clinical social worker for, I don't even know how many years now, probably 13 plus years now. So I had always had a background in mental health, and I took a long stint of not being in mental health, but being in corporate health tech. And I think I started to get burnt out and was really kind of missing that mental health piece. And it was during a time when I had become a mother. I had become a mother during the pandemic. It was super hard for me. I thought I was preparing for postpartum depression, but instead experienced postpartum anxiety, which I didn't know was even a thing. And so at one point during my corporate health tech career, I was like, I need to do something else. I need to get back into mental health some way, somehow. And I thought, like, what if we did a podcast, or what if I did a podcast? But I felt like I couldn't really do it alone. And I felt like I didn't know where to begin. And at the time, as I was experiencing the beginnings of my motherhood journey, I was watching Jasmine's on social media because we were friends from high school. We hadn't really stayed that much in touch between high school and adulthood, but I was watching her experience in motherhood, and she had started to really open up about her postpartum depression experience, which was really inspiring for me because she was really just being vulnerable. And a lot of times, you know, within your circles and with friends, people just aren't as open about it. And so you don't know, and you only know what you know. And so I had reached out to Jasmine, and I was like, hey, I have this like crazy idea. What if we did a podcast? And at the time, I specifically was just thinking of maternal mental health, but I think Jasmine really put the cherry on top of what if it was AAPI, maternal mental health, which then I'll turn the mic to her.
Yeah, you know, before Healing the Tigress, I had been invited to be a guest on a few podcasts myself. And I think it stemmed from, like Peggy was saying, I was sharing about my story pretty openly. I had a blog, so I would write about it. I would share on social media, and I got connected with a lot of people who were doing work in mental health, specifically maternal mental health. And I had volunteered with like Postpartum Support International. So I had some connections, and I felt like I was starting to be sort of like embedded in this field and knowing people and stuff. And so I did get requests to be on a couple of podcasts and realized that I actually really enjoyed the storytelling aspect of podcasts, and it was more fun than I thought it was going to be. And so when Peggy asked me to consider starting a podcast with her, I think those past experiences gave me a little bit of a boost in thinking, actually, maybe this was something I could see myself doing. And, you know, I've always been a writer. Peggy and I, in high school, were in journalism together. So we've always been writers. And, you know, this podcast is a form of journalism, we feel. And so Yeah, when I was writing about the journey, I felt like, okay, there's a certain way I'm reaching people because if even I could help one person with my story, that would have been worth it. But audio storytelling was just kind of this different medium that I realized could provide a different journalistic angle to destigmatizing mental health through storytelling or interviews with experts that we might know and then reach a broad audience in a different way. So I think her idea, based on some of my connections, and I think it just kind of like morphed into this thing where like, yeah, let's try it, right? And it's a little bit less scary when you have somebody else doing it with you. And I also felt like, I'm a clinical pharmacist. I don't work with a lot of specifically mental health patients per se. I come across them, of course, but I felt like a little bit of imposter syndrome. Like, I don't know who I am to be giving advice or hosting something about mental health. But with Peggy's experience, I felt more comfortable saying, hey, I'm partnering with someone who really does have experience in mental health. And together we bring lived experience as well as clinical experience.
What I love about this combination is that there is like an avenue for nuance in your conversations. But for people that are listening to this for the first time, I think it's important to define our terms. Like, what is postpartum anxiety? What is postpartum depression? And how is it specific or how do you see it specific to AAPI women or femme identifying?
Yeah, so I guess I can go with that one. With postpartum depression and postpartum anxiety, these are what are called perinatal mental health disorders. These are mental health disorders that are experienced specifically in the perinatal period. Perinatal covers prenatal, pregnancy, and postpartum. And officially, they say postpartum is like a year, but we've learned and we've seen that it can happen beyond that first year. Even one of our season 1 episodes is that it isn't boxed in that first year, that you can experience it beyond that first year. And so it's these mental health experiences that are encompassed within that postpartum perinatal period. And so it can feel very much like your run-of-the-mill depression and anxiety, but I think it's just very specific to that transition into motherhood and all of the things that encompasses that. So there's other risk factors versus someone who has generalized anxiety disorder. There's other factors versus just major depressive. And these things can turn into, if untreated, they can turn into having major depressive disorder or generalized anxiety disorder. But it is preventable because we know that the onset is in this perinatal period. And so it is really about treatment is targeting screening and being early in the prevention and doing these things sooner. So we're not waiting after the fact when someone is 3 months postpartum and losing sleep and have no idea what resources are available.
And I will have to say, like, for me, I had up till this point in my life never sort of experienced any sort of mental health challenges or felt like it was to the point that I really needed to seek out help. And after becoming a mother, it was just so eye-opening to me what depression really felt like. Even as a clinician that had rotated through psych hospitals and learned about all the medications and all this stuff, to be in that patient's shoe and actually experience it for myself was just so mind-blowing and eye-opening to me that, oh my gosh, this is what depression feels like. And a part of it too, I think, is with our Asian American layers, or even just like society's sort of depiction of what motherhood is. A lot of times you question yourself and say, is this really depression or anxiety? Or is this just what I'm supposed to be experiencing as a new mom? Because I'm just supposed to, it's supposed to be hard and I'm supposed to take it. And I'm supposed to struggle through this. This is normal. I can get through this. But when it's too crippling to the point that your day-to-day functioning is so impacted, like for me, the thought of getting out of bed to even move myself to the couch felt like I had to use so much energy that I did not possess at that time. And like nothing felt joyous. And this is a period of time when you are supposed to be bonding with your newborn baby. And that just felt so sad that I couldn't access that. And I didn't know what was wrong with me. So I think like what we are trying to do is break down some of those layers for people to say like, no, that's not normal. And you shouldn't have to suffer alone. and you can get treatment, and it is treatable. But if you don't, it can get pretty bad. So especially for our community, I think it's important to talk about, because we are already so used to swallowing that bitterness, burying that down, and just trying to suck it up and get through it. So hopefully that kind of answers your question.
That does. Y'all are very thoughtful in the way that you answer it and defining the term and also getting specific to the care. I do agree with you. I think that the way that mothers are treated in the postpartum process is that it's your problem to bear. And it's such a systemic issue because we're taught as women that we need to deal with problems on our own, that we need to fix ourselves. And I believe that it's really more so like an American ideal. Productivity, efficiency, individualism are three of our guiding gods, if you will, in this country. And I guess what is the mission and the hope in showcasing storytelling, vulnerability that each listener comes away with in each episode?
I feel like ultimately it is reminding folks that they're not alone. Because I think that's the number one lie that the postpartum depression or any perinatal mental health disorder tells you, that you're alone and no one else is going through this, or you have to do it alone. And I think when you mention those American gods, I think when I think back to what motherhood might be like in indigenous cultures or matriarchal cultures, it's done in community.
Yeah.
And I think we're creating a virtual community of folks that are tuning in and feeling like, oh, I hear this person's story and that feels like my story. And even though I'm not going to ever meet that guest that I listened to on Healing the Tigress ever in my life, I know that she exists. I know that she looks like me. And that means that there's not something broken about me. This is something that someone else just like me is going through, and give them hope to be like, and this is what worked for them. And I too can seek help. And I too don't have to suffer in silence. I too can reach out and find someone to help me. And maybe it is a provider that looks like me.
I did want to ask, like, with every person that you have on the show, there are talks about the beliefs and stigmas that women have to go through and to work through. We already touched on it a little bit, but you talked a lot about how women are taught to navigate this all on their own. Can you break down that stigma of what that realistically looks like within the system?
I think, especially if we're talking about AAPI families, two of the biggest and hardest things I think to address or talk about has always been around medications and therapy. And the idea that you can just get through it without having to use those things. And my family seemed to believe that you don't need to take medications, which is very ironic because, you know, I'm a pharmacist.
I was going to say that.
Right? and even myself, like when I was going through it, I was trying to course correct and problem solve things that I thought would negate the need to turn to medication. And I don't know why I was so scared of it myself, but I guess I just thought, oh no, I can't be that broken, quote unquote, that I need medication. And now on the other side of it, I'm like, that was just the wrong way to think about it, because therapy and medication are tools. And similarly with medications, therapy in my family is also not a thing. They think therapy doesn't really work. Why are you wasting your money on it? You know, you just need to think positive and think your way through things and it'll be okay as long as you have a positive mindset. But that's not, like, clinically, that's not always the way that it's going to work. And they think if you want to talk about it, you can just talk to your family. But it's not really the same thing. So I think that, like, our show tries to create the space to talk about these complexities, especially as Asian American children of immigrants. I think we're straddling these two worlds where we've been westernized, but we still hold on to some of these Asian ideas that we can just approach everything naturally, holistically. And I do think we need to better blend some of the tools at our disposal.
I actually think that's the perfect transition into the next question of, for you, Peggy, as a mental health professional, like, how do you thoughtfully guide conversations around treatment and healing in the way that feels supportive and approachable for clients. Because I can also acknowledge, as clients, we do have to walk the line between skepticism from the client of, will this even work for me? And the other side of hope of, I hope this works and I'm trusting you to make it better.
I think that part of it is also my background in social work specifically is really about that self-determination and really having it be strength-based and client-centered. And so I always tell my clients, if I'm doing an initial interview, that I'm not the one healing you. I'm on this journey with you. I'm not the expert, which might poke at some Asian like tiger mom inside them. Like, no, you're the one with the degree and that you're supposed to be the expert. And this is where like, no. Your journey and your healing actually comes from within. You're going to be the expert of your history and your trauma and all those things. I'm here to walk alongside you. And I hope that that kind of approach makes it seem less intimidating, less like, oh, but you're the one with the answers, like, help me. It's no, you're the driver, I'm the co-pilot. And I really try to take a gentle approach. I like have to really get a sense of, is my client ready to go there? How far do I push them? How much do I just kind of gauge they're not ready to go there yet, and that's okay. I think especially in kind of in light of Healing the Tigress, there's a lot of tiger momming, and I can see sometimes clients might tiger mom their therapy. Like, why am I not better yet? And having to remind them that this is a journey and these are things like 1 week you might feel great and another week you won't, and we're doing this together. And I do think that there's something inherently impactful about being from the same culture or similar culture of my clients, that we in essence speak the same language, not literally, but in the sense of we have these shared experiences. I understand what it means when they want to be like, people like, set boundaries with your mom and tell her this. No, that's not going to work in an Asian family. So I'm not going to be like, guess what, mom, we're not coming to the Lunar New Year event because of my trauma. There's some things that are just baked into our culture and we have to work through it.
Correct.
So I love the concept and idea of decolonizing therapy. Of course, I do work with non-AAPI clients, but I think specifically with my AAPI clients, it really hits home for them that like, I get it. We really do have to take a cultural lens because otherwise it really doesn't feel right. It feels like it doesn't fit. And so I think it does feel different than maybe even what we learned in school. But I feel like when I get to be authentically an AAPI therapist, I'm able to really get deeper with specifically my AAPI clients.
That's so good. I think one of the difficulties of being an AAPI therapist, just from experience, is that feeling of, I am not above you. I am your equal and I am here to do it with you. And it really does take a level of faith in moments where someone is going through that depression. Like Jasmine, when you were talking about the line you said was to really experience depression itself, to really go through the day-to-day lived experience of not being able to even have connection with your baby, right? To have depression is to almost like feel gray all the time, and there's no light at the end of the tunnel.
Exactly.
So as therapists, we really do have to walk the line of, how can I hold hope for you while also empowering you to make your own decisions? But I think, Jasmine, if you feel comfortable talking about your postpartum journey, how has it influenced the way that you're doing life now?
As in, you want to hear about the story or more of the impact of it now?
Or whatever you're comfortable sharing today.
Yeah, I mean, I guess to give some background if people don't know my story, I write extensively in my blog, so sometimes I'm like, oh, I feel like I'm resharing this. But to give some context, I had gone through like a short stint of infertility, and so I really took good care of myself during pregnancy because in my head, the finish line was childbirth and getting the baby earthside safely. That's all I really cared about because it took so long to get pregnant that I was very protective of that. But in preparing so thoroughly for that, I feel like I really forgot or didn't know I had to prepare what it meant to be a mom on the other side, the postpartum journey. And so it really caught me off guard when I encountered problem after my child was born. Childbirth was actually very great. It was empowering. It was beautiful. I had a wonderful doula. But when she came, very soon after, we started dealing with a lot of issues. And, part of it was her stuff. Part of it was my stuff. I won't go into her stuff for her privacy's sake. But for me, like on my side, breastfeeding was a huge issue. And the pressures of trying to exclusively breastfeed were immense. I just couldn't do it right. And we had multiple lactation consultants, multiple different breast pumps. I tried like everything. And life just suddenly felt like an endless 2 to 3 hour cycle of feeding, cleaning, trying to sleep. And then the sleep part was actually really bad because I developed this awful insomnia. And I was exhausted to the bone, but I could not fall asleep. And I think that anxiety of not being able to fall asleep really just fed on itself, that it pulled me into this like deep spiraling depression that even after I abruptly decided to stop breastfeeding, it still wasn't resolving. And I just felt like something inside me was broken. And I think it just kept dragging me further down into depression. So basically to say, I had very severe postpartum depression, and it felt very blindsiding as a healthcare practitioner that it could happen to me. And so I had to confront my own stigmas and biases about taking medications and going to therapy, because all of it was new to me. Even the therapy part, I was just very skeptical, even in the beginning. So surviving the depression and getting out from this really dark hole that I was in, I think it really humbled me and then fueled me in a way that I told myself if I ever got out of this hole, I would want to help others avoid getting into that pitfall. And so after recovering, I started writing, I started sharing about it, I volunteered for Postpartum Support International, and then I met Peggy. I mean, we reconnected, and the rest is kind of history. And so that's why I think it fuels a lot of this passion behind what we do, because I never want anyone to go through what I went through.
Yeah, that feeling of loneliness and silent confrontation. I'm curious about the friendship that the both of you have had, because to meet in high school in a journalism class, and was it journalism or was it like just optional after school?
No, it was a class. And then, I mean, there was a lot of after school hours put into the newspaper.
Nice.
So yes, it was, even though it was a class, it was also kind of an extracurricular. It was like both.
To know each other at that stage of development, like pre-adult, to now knowing each other as moms, like how have one another like influenced the way that you guide just like your life now, having the podcast together, just like being moms together? I'm assuming you both have to interact pretty regularly to have a podcast.
Every day,
right?
We talk every day.
Probably talk to each other more than our husbands.
Don't tell them that, but it's probably true.
Yeah. I mean, we weren't that close in high school. We knew each other. We had mutual friends. Again, we both wrote for the school newspaper, but we weren't that close. And so even when we started to reconnect after, social media is a funny thing, right? You hate it and you love it. But I'm sure we added each other on social media because like, oh yeah, that girl from high school, cool. And then we would, connect here and there. But we hadn't actually hung out until I was like 2 months postpartum maybe. And by that point, I forget, I think maybe Jasmine was like maybe 8 or 10 months postpartum. I can't remember. But that might have been the first time we saw each other since high school.
Yeah.
Correct me if I'm wrong. So
I think a lot of our interaction was on social media in terms of, like Peggy said, she was following along my journey. We were kind of just back and forth, sometimes commenting on each other's things and like seeing what the other was up to. And she would have just these really thoughtful responses to some of the things I would write. And I feel like I could really, like it was very genuine. And I actually wanted to talk to her about things. Like I would actually open up to her about things and she would dive in with me. So I think that was the beginning of a rekindling of that relationship once we were both moms. And when she was a new mom, I was like, man, I want to make sure she's supported. And so we made plans to like meet up one day. It was like right before the pandemic broke out. Like literally the month before. It was like Lunar New Year. like right before. I remember because I had brought red envelopes and I literally forgot to give it to her when she drove off. I'm like, no, come back. And so that was, like she said, the first time we had actually physically seen each other since high school.
Wow.
But I think motherhood really started a different kind of relationship and friendship between us that felt a lot more genuine. Like in high school, I think a lot of it is like you're just trying to keep up. You're just trying to show that, you know, I'm cool and we can hang. And, you know, a lot of it is based off your popularity or whatnot. And I think a lot of it can be very superficial, but this felt very real. Like this was definitely like the blossoming of an actual friendship. And we have talked a lot about how like it's amazing how much it's grown since you know, we reached out and talked to each other a couple years back, and this is our baby. Like Healing the Tigress is our baby.
I think if it wasn't for the podcast either, even though we did connect over her postpartum depression and our motherhood experience, I think the fact that we are modeling having hard conversations and having to talk about these things that no one talks about, it creates a safe space. And I think that what I love about my friendship with Jasmine is that I know that she's someone I can be vulnerable with. And I know that I can do that with like my other best friends as well. But I think because she models, like, I'm not scared to talk about these heavy things. I'm not afraid to like be real with people. And when you do that, it does make people want to open up with you. And I think maybe that's the same with our guests, but we're like, look, we're not scared to talk about postpartum was really hard, or I'm not scared to talk about like, man, toddlerhood's really hard, or I'm not scared to talk about like, man, homework for our kids is really hard. Like it just keeps going. But then you know, like, hey, this is a real person and they're not going to judge me and they're going to really be interested and care. And so I think we could have probably still had a good friendship, but I think because we created this baby of Healing the Tigress, we both see each other's passion for this, and we both see how we both care so much about this and these bigger things in life, bigger than like who's going to homecoming dance or something, you know what I mean? It's like, oh, you get to be real and vulnerable. And I think sometimes it's just really hard to find people in your life to be genuine and vulnerable with. And I think that's what I appreciate most that this has brought for us.
For people who are listening on audio, Jasmine is tearing up.
Called out.
Yep, I do that a lot. Usually on most of our episodes, I'm the one that tears up first. And there are only probably a couple of episodes where Peggy actually, this must be her therapist, like,
it is true.
Facade or whatever she keeps up, but she's very good at holding it in. There's only a couple episodes where it's genuinely, I see her like tearing up too.
I don't know, Helen, if you have to do this too, but I think it really is a therapist thing. Like I could cry in every session with my clients, but I really can't.
I've only cried in one of the 7 years that I've been practicing therapy. I've only cried one time. And then there was another time where a client saw me tearing up from her story, but I didn't let a tear drop. But I think it is like in the therapy space, I think it's really impacted the way that I do relationship, where I just have a blank slate and I allow what's coming to come. But recently I've gotten more emotional. Like the one time I cried was like for the first time in a client session was a month ago. And it was because of what was happening within our political system and how it's just been really heartbreaking to see what's been on the news. And I'll just leave it at that, because if I do talk about it, we'll divert in a completely different direction.
Yeah.
We will all start crying. But I did want to ask, like, motherhood, from what you're saying, has changed you completely. Like, I'm not a mom. I work with a lot of moms, but I'm curious about how your perspective in life has changed and what you prioritize now that you've become a mom or you are a mom.
Oof, deep question.
I'm asking this selfishly.
Yeah, I think...
Get ahead.
I think that a huge part of why postpartum was so hard for me was that I kept thinking I could be the same person I was before. And I kept trying to say, I want to go back to how it was. I want to be normal again. I want to be that version of me again. And there's this sort of identity shift and change when you become a mom that I think the sooner you can accept the fact that you'll never really be the same person you were again, and that it's a whole new chapter, really, not even a chapter. I feel like it's a whole new volume of this part of your life that you kind of have to recreate and recraft your identity. And I felt so lost. And maybe there was a grief in losing the old part of me and thinking I could never access her again or never sort of be that same person again. So yeah, I think that now, having gone through that transformation and acceptance of this new identity and shift, you know, I think it's just such a humbling experience that you realize that change is inevitable. And even now on this side of it, I'm still changing all the time. I'm still growing all the time. And I used to think change was bad, but it's not. It's inevitable and you have to go with it. And my daughter, I think, has just brought that out in me that as she's growing, I'm growing too. And all the different stages that she goes through, I evolve with her. And I think that she definitely has become my priority. But at the same time, I also know after going through postpartum depression, how much and how important of a priority I am too. Because I have to take care of me in order to be here and present for her, to be able to guide her. Because she's so important to me, I have to place importance on myself. And I think that's the biggest shift and learning that I've gotten out of this, is that we deserve to take care of ourselves. We don't have to weather through everything alone. We don't have to suck it up. We should find community, and we should not have to do these things alone. So I think that's kind of the biggest thing I feel like I've evolved out of this, and continue to know that it's going to ever change as our children grow up.
Yeah. I think mine's very similar. I was going to say it's the inner work that ended up being prioritized, because actually prior to being pregnant, I had taken a really long break from therapy. I had gone through a lot of therapy in my early 20s. You know, my frontal cortex wasn't developed yet, so it was a tough time. And then also going through MSW school and wanting to go into mental health, I needed to make sure I was taking care of myself. But then there was a long chunk of my late 20s and stuff that I just didn't see a therapist anymore. I don't know, either felt like I didn't need to, or I don't know why, but it forced me to say, okay, I need to take care of myself. And this was when I was pregnant. I preemptively tried to find a perinatal mental health therapist, and then realizing so much of the motherhood journey and parenting work is less about like, how do I parent and how do I do this? But what is this unlocking for me? What childhood traumas are coming up? What generational patterns am I trying to break? And so it's actually caused me to do so much more inner work. And I think I have to prioritize that even more. So very similar to Jasmine, like I have to prioritize me. I have to take care of myself, which in itself is breaking a generational pattern, because I think the mothers before us did not. And that the modeling they showed us was so much sacrifice. And that's maybe part of the lie in the beginning that really fueled our perinatal mental health disorders, is that, no, this is just something you have to do, and realizing that that was such a lie. And that in order for this to truly work, we have to do the inner work.
I'm going to use that as a clip. That was so good. In terms of inner work, what does that even look like? In terms of like looking within and breaking generational curses? And if you're comfortable maybe sharing things in your life that you've had to unlearn.
I think we've had some talks with certain guests about what working on inner work and talking to your inner child kind of looks like. And I feel like I didn't even realize there were certain things that were impressed upon me until I became a mom. And I'm realizing that my child is triggering me because of the way that I was brought up, maybe. And so that work, I think, starts with when you notice yourself, you know, getting upset or like, why is this so hard? Another way to go around about it is saying like, well, why does this feel so hard in this moment specifically? Like, is there something that's making me react this way? And I think a lot of that curiosity is the beginnings of doing that inner work to explore and say, why exactly am I so triggered when I hear like, my daughter's not playing this musical instrument correctly or something, right? Or like, I know this is a weird one, but whenever she gets sick, I get very anxious that she's still coughing after like so long. And I'm like, my gosh, she still has a cough. It's still lingering. What's wrong? That's not okay. And I realized that comes from, as a child, my parents would always try to quiet me when I was coughing. And they say, no, coughing's bad. Coughing's really bad. Don't cough because that means you're going to ruin your throat. And, you should suppress it. Suppress it as much as you can. Don't let it out. And as a healthcare person, it's like, no, you need to get that out. The whole point of the cough is because there's something in there you got to get out. So
keeping all of that phlegm down must have been really painful.
It was so awful. It was so bad. When I was a kid, I'm just like, trying not to let my parents hear me cough. And then I realized on this other side, when my daughter is sick and she's coughing, I feel this like inner frustration or tension where I'm like, why do I feel like that? It's okay. She's sick. It's okay. It's fine. It'll pass. Kids they constantly get sick. They're always coughing. They're always sniffling. It's never going to be like a net zero all the time. So I think I had to learn to undo some of that. And it goes back actually a lot of times to your childhood and maybe what you went through. Sometimes you don't even realize that it's there.
It's so true. My husband told me the other day, he was like, I think you're addicted to change. And I was like, what do you mean? He's like, you like moving things around everywhere. And he was like, you kind of upend things when you feel uncomfortable. And I think it was because of my immigrant background, having to move every year until we turned 12. There was almost this like high that I would get having to improve and improve and improve and improve, But Peggy, what about for yourself? Like, is there anything that's like helped you along the journey? And what does inner work mean for you?
Yeah, it's interesting because it made me think of something a client told me once where she's like, this transition into motherhood is called matrescence. And she's like, it's basically you went through adolescence. And this is actually another thing. It's the last time you went through hormonal changes was adolescence. Now you're going through another hormonal change and it's matrescence. The next hormonal change is menopause. And maybe one day there will be a whole episode on menopause.
God bless menopause.
God bless. But when you think about it, it's like, okay, what were we doing in adolescence? We were redefining an identity. And so now in matrescence, I think part of my inner work is also redefining an identity. And that might also mean, what are my values now? What truly matters? Because if I'm still trying to be that old person, like Jasmine said, like I kept trying to be this other person before I had a baby, I'm going to be running myself ragged. And so it is this opportunity where I always tell my clients too, who's been born is not just your baby, but you are now reborn too as a mother. And this is an opportunity to say, what are my values? What really matters? And for some, I always say there's some people who say that they don't change after motherhood, and maybe they really don't. Maybe, I don't know, whatever. I don't want to put a blanket statement that we all have to completely change. But I think at least for me personally, I can't keep operating in the way that I used to. And that means old patterns. What are some old patterns that don't work anymore? What are some ways that even I used to try to cope with things? I think those have to change because now it's not just me in the equation, it's my child. And so that does mean things like Jasmine said, like the ways that they trigger me, maybe I never thought that would have triggered me before. And it causes me to have to reevaluate, kind of similar to Jasmine, whose voice is that? Whose voice is telling me like, oh my goodness, I really can't deal with this or that right now. Where is that coming from? And having those conversations with myself or my inner child. I think I have to do a lot of reparenting of my inner child. And I feel like you don't have to have a child to do that. But I feel like when you have a child, you're kind of forced to, because there's literally a version of you running around. So if you haven't talked to the child version of you inside you, there's a child version of you running around and you got to deal with both of them. And so I think that when you can, it is having that inner child work and holding space for her.
It's like that mirror. They're a mirror.
So as you look ahead for what the Healing the Tigress show is going to become, what are some of the things that you're excited by? What are things that maybe guests or topics that you're excited to introduce for the future of the show?
Ooh, she's trying to get a sneak preview.
Yes, I am, as a fan.
Let's see. I think we've always tried to make this a space that people can turn to for resources on their mental health or find a story that they can resonate with. And you'll hear a lot of our plugs are to say that taking medications are not shameful, going to therapy is not a bad thing, and it's a mental strengthening for you. So I feel like we always revolve around those kinds of themes to make it available and acceptable as a form of healing or tool to heal. And I think we want to highlight there's just such a vast span of journeys throughout parenthood. There could be so many untraditional paths, and we just want to be able to give that AAPI space to say that, look, someone looks like you and is going through this. You're not the only person that could be going through this, because I think that representation is super vital and very important. And so I think a lot of these stories you might be able to find elsewhere on social media or whatnot. But I think if we find a story that we feel like, wow, like what an incredible journey into parenthood, or breaking generational cycles and working on your inner self to raise kids in a different way, I think we want to highlight that, especially if they have an AAPI layer to them that we can explore, because people ultimately will feel like if they're also in a similar boat, hey, I have someone to relate to. So I don't know if Peggy wants to tease some of the stories that might be upcoming, or if she has other things she wants to add.
I have to remember what those stories are. I was going to say, I think ultimately being able to start to be like the resource that people are turning to, like even yourself saying that you shared it with a postpartum friend yourself. I mean this in the most not self-promoting way, but I hope we become a household name among AAPI parents. And so I think, to echo Jasmine, just again, making sure we're highlighting the lesser heard stories or the untraditional stories, but specifically putting that AAPI face to it. I think the other thing that I'm hoping for, this is less a teaser, but more of a hope, and maybe someone out there will hear it and say, great, I want to be on the podcast or something. But my hope is also that in line with trying to make sure underrepresented is being represented, is more of the AAPI diaspora. I think when we think of AAPI, there is unintentionally a very heavy East Asian representation. And Jasmine's our PR person. She works hard tooth and nail to try to get our guests. And it's hard because I think part of why it might be hard to get the underrepresented parts of the AAPI diaspora is that there maybe just aren't enough people talking about it. And if we can get more, because at the end of the day, AAPI encompasses so many countries and languages and cultures. And we're not a monolith, and we can see how that model minority myth can harm some of folks that are not East Asian, like, are we representing people who are Hmong or people who are Southeast Asian or Polynesian or whatnot? There's just such a wide variety, and also not all of them have tiger mom tendencies in their culture, right? So even though we are healing the tigress, how are we encompassing some of those stories? So that's not necessarily a teaser. That is more like an invitation to listeners that if that sounds like you, we want to hear your story. We want to continue to put faces and voices to people who don't feel seen and heard, whose experiences aren't seen and heard. And so again, echoing Jasmine, are there stories that are, again, unconventional ways to motherhood, or stories that are just not what you hear a lot about their parental experience?
Beautiful. Well, as a fan, as someone that listens, I just want to say thank you. And I'm so grateful for the service both of you have done on this earth, on this planet. And I do say that literally, because I think that the way that Asian women are portrayed is very one-sided. And to put in a space in this world where pain is welcome, where fear is welcome, where you know, a lot of the struggles that we've gone through is open-ended, to just like have a seat at the table and to talk it through. I just want to say thank you, because there's hope, you know? So,
Yeah.
yeah.
And I think we really do try to branch out and encompass different groups and people, and even dads. We have dads on the podcast too. We try to include at least like one dad a season or a male voice.
Yeah.
Because that's another area that I feel like, even though our podcast says it focuses on maternal mental health, a part of it is also your partner. And Asian males also, I feel like, are not as easily equipped or able or willing maybe to seek out mental health services or treatment or help, or maybe even recognizing that they need to. So I hope that our podcast also opens a little bit of a window into that. And we do have a small population of male listeners, actually. I actually think Peggy said last time it was like 25%. So that's another thing too, if you're listening, that, you know, this is not just for moms, it's for all parents. And even, you know, learning how to reparent yourself or want to parent differently, those are also for the dads. So we just hope that, like Peggy said, we can really be able to try to encompass more of the diaspora and groups of people that may feel underrepresented.
Yeah. I think the statistic is like 1 in 10 dads experience some sort of postpartum depression.
Correct. Yeah.
So it is like an unmet need in so much of our community, especially AAPI men are the least likely to seek out services until it gets really bad.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay. Well, Peggy and Jasmine, thank you so much for being on Sincere Practice. I appreciate y'all. Thank you for being on.
Thank
you for having us.
Yeah.